In the beginning of last month, I was hanging out with some friends and one of them pulled a copy of this game. It was on PlayStation and we took turns going at it. Just from the aesthetic and the fast pace, I knew that game was right up my alley, yet I never struggled so hard in the second phase of a game except for that one time. Despite the tribulations, there was something to that game that just called me for whatever reason. It was a call that I remember receiving from other games as well, and the moment I saw my friend picking up the controller, I knew exactly what it was. It was the possibility, the promise that, with enough dedication, I could become absolutely cracked at that game. This is Ghost Runner, and as you can tell by the intro sequence, this game is extremely fast-paced. I've seen some people describe it as Doom, but you're a cyborg ninja glass cannon, and I gotta say I couldn't have put it better. I only know 2 other games that let you ball this hard, and one of them doesn't even exist anymore. There's something about this game that makes it almost infinitely replayable, and in my opinion is that because Ghost Runner is a game with a high skill ceiling. In case you're unfamiliar with that term, a skill ceiling is how good you can get at a given game, whereas a skill floor is a minimum amount of competence you need to have to be able to play a certain game. This good can either refer to your mechanical ability or strategic prowess. It really varies from game to game. Ghost Runner is a game with a relatively high skill floor and a very high skill ceiling. With the exception of the bosses, everything in this game has 1 HP, including you, so you need to make full use of your mobility and tools to make it through the game. It will be a bit tough to get a good understanding of your full toolkit in the beginning, but by the time you reach those last few missions, you'll be running circles around the enemies of this game as you teach them division the hard way. And then you'll be killed by this motherfucker. Objectively the worst enemy in the game. Here's my tip for you if you want to play this. I remember asking my friend why was there a crouch button in a game where moving at any speed slower than Mach 5 would turn your body into Swiss cheese, to which we replied with a very enlightening, "Oh." The answer is this motherfucker. Just time his attacks and slide underneath to make him miss. 60% of the time it works every time. It's the little discoveries like these that add to your repertoire when it comes to how good you get at this type of game that is a big part of the appeal for me. You get to discover more and more optimized ways to clear a stage with a higher score or in a shorter amount of time. There's something primordial, almost visceral about knowing that your brain is perfectly outputting very carefully made decisions in a fraction of a second, and even one slip up could mean your death. And yet you're still capable of processing all those different inputs with pinpoint accuracy and decimating all matter of man and machine that stands in your way. But I'm not making this video to exclusively talk about Ghost Runner because, let's face it, nobody's really talking about that game anymore. I'm here to talk about the appeal of games with high skill ceilings. And one such game that became incredibly popular as of last year is none other than Like Ghost Runner, this game is incredibly fast and the controls are extremely precise. In my opinion, it doesn't have a skill floor as high as Ghost Runner, but it will vary from person to person. Specifically, the phases in Ultrakill are easier while the bosses are harder, and in Ghost Runner is the other way around. The first thing I thought when I loaded Ultrakill for the first time was, holy shit, my mouse sensitivity is way too high. But at the same time, my control over the game felt much more precise than any other game that I had ever played. I have no idea how the dev did this, but somehow in this game you have the precision and dexterity of a neurosurgeon while also having the mobility and speed of a ferret high on coke. Similarly to Ghost Runner, you'll start the game having almost all of your mobility skills already unlocked, so if you know what you're doing you can make the game immediately bend to your will. From the very first level, you can already infer that this is not a game that should be played as most other FPSs. You have dashes, wall jumps and ground slams, and the mechanics only get wilder from then on. By the beginning of the game, you'll be shooting these goofy little guys with a pistol and jumping around a little bit, but by the end, you'll be doing trick shots such as tossing 2 coins in the air, pulling out your railgun and shooting them in a way that the bullet ricochets off them and hits the enemy 3 times. And if that sounded complicated, don't even get me started on the advanced movement tech. I swear, seeing speedruns of this game is tantamount to having an epileptic attack. Like you're seeing in the footage playing in the background, there are bosses in this game that can be beaten in less than 10 seconds, while it would normally take you a few dozens if not a few hundreds of tries to beat. And the way you get this good is rarely through buff stacking or glitches, but through the use of known game mechanics that have been deliberately implemented and refined mechanical skill. Even though Ultrakill doesn't demand you to be this competent to beat the game, to get to the secret bosses it does require you to beat each and every stage of their respective act perfectly. And after doing so, you'll be thinking that you're the shit, and you'll be promptly curb stomped by the aforementioned bosses for a few dozens, if not a few hundreds of tries. At least for the first one. I couldn't tell you about the second boss because I got stuck trying to P-rank 4-2. On top of having a high skill ceiling, it makes sense to look at Ultra Kill as a game that has not a skill floor but a skill stairs, because there will be times where you'll be cruising through a stage like a god of annihilation and even killing the bosses you struggled with in one try, only to then have your ego completely decimated by the secret bosses. But now let's talk about another game that I suck ass at, but this time it was because back when I played it, I was too young to realize my own skill issue. Even though the footage you're seeing in the background is of Sekiro, that's not the game I'm referring to. Even though Sekiro does have a high skill ceiling, the movement tech isn't as flashy as the other ones, and although learning the combat is a bit hard, mastering it is comparatively easy. I'm referring to that game I said didn't exist anymore in the beginning of the video. Unlike Ghost Runner and Ultra Kill, this is a multiplayer, and it's an old one, coming out in Korea in 2003 and in the rest of the world in 2006. I'm curious to see how many of you remember or even know this game. My friends, the game I'm referring to is none other than Gunz The Duel. Little bro, this game made my childhood, even though I was far too young to be mechanically competent enough to play it properly. This is another one of those games where bugs become features, and the core element of this game in particular is that every single animation can be cancelled. What this implies is that, for example, you can have a semi-automatic shotgun with a very high fire rate, provided you can alternate between your two pump-action shotguns fast enough. This is just one of the many different techniques that compose what is known as the K-style, or the Korean style, referring to the place where the game was first launched. You know the game is gonna go crazy when running up walls is considered suboptimal technique. The actual way you climb walls is by slashing them with your sword and pulverizing any poor foe that stands in your way with your auto shotguns. I heard that the term skill ceiling is considered more appropriate when referring to multiplayer games, but being absolutely cracked at CSGO or Valorant just isn't as flashy. And although I'm in absolutely no place to make that judgment since I've never played either one of those games, I just feel like the smooth movement tech is a very big addition to having a high skill ceiling, be it intentionally implemented or not. It's the equivalent to having a completely new dimension open for the player to explore. It's often literally exploring a new dimension since those games make use of 3 positional coordinates instead of 2. You need to be able to keep tabs on your position in a complex 3-dimensional space, while also dashing around at ludicrous speeds and being precise and fast enough with your aim. And in the case of Gunz The Duel, you also need to keep a lookout for everyone else also doing those things. Although this video kept to the subject of skill ceiling when it comes to a player's dexterity, it would be stupid to neglect all the strategy games with a crazy high skill ceiling as well. In fact, I'd go as far as arguing that there are some strategy games where there is no such thing as a skill ceiling, or at least an achievable one. Think of chess. What is the skill ceiling of chess? I haven't got the slightest clue, because looking at it from a layman's perspective, the ways in which you can outsmart an opponent are practically limitless. Other than your memory, there isn't really a limit to how many moves ahead you can think of when you're playing chess. It's just that the processing power it takes to think of them increases exponentially, but there's never a point where you reach an actual hard limit. Whereas in games like Ultra Kill, the limit, the skill ceiling, is technically determined by how fast and accurately you can move your mouse and press your key inputs, and the human brain can only process information so fast. But when it comes to strategy games, where you have an indefinite amount of time to think of your approach, there is no physical limit. Not that I would know, I get my ass beat by the easy AI in Age of Empires. Man, talking about the duel so much got me in the mood to play again. Oh,